Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a birth story of when I had a C-section with baby James. I asked on Instagram and I gave you guys 4 video ideas that I could shoot today, and the C-section story won with overwhelming majority. So that is the story that I'm going to tell today, how baby James came into the world. But before I get into the story, I do want to have a word from today's sponsor. Today we have the same sponsor that we had last week, which is an online counseling website called BetterHelp that helps connect you with professional licensed therapists that you can utilize from the comfort of your home. Right now, there is a lot of anxiety in the world, and I know a lot of people are struggling with both the state of the world and with social distancing. BetterHelp is not a crisis hotline. Instead, it's for working through issues one-on-one with a therapist. You can work at your own pace and you can set up appointments that work with your schedule. Everything is confidential and you can get started in less than 24 hours. You can also get 10% off by going to betterhelp.com/EF for Elle Fowler. You're just going to fill out a questionnaire that's going to help them assess your needs and you will get matched with a counselor. So that is betterhelp.com/EF for 10% off your first month. Thank you so much, BetterHelp, for sponsoring another video on my channel. I really appreciate it. All right, so let's get into today's story, which is my birth story with a C-section. So if you're new to my channel or if you just need a refresher, I did have a scheduled C-section with my baby because I broke my back a couple of years ago, which I just did a video on. I will link it below. It's called I Broke My Back and It Hurt, because it definitely did. Because of the location of the break in my spine, my doctor felt more comfortable with a C-section, although she was very open to the idea of me trying a vaginal birth if that is what I had my heart set on. But I just figured in the end to go with the scheduled C-section, and that is what we ended up doing. It also helped that my mom has had 2 C-sections and a natural birth, so she was able to kind of go over the pros and cons with me. She had a natural birth with me, an emergency C-section with Blair, and a scheduled C-section with Jelly. So she was really able to give me the full picture of the differences between them, and she told me, you know, out of her 3 births, the scheduled C-section was by far the easiest, and it was also the safest, you know, as compared to her emergency C-section, which obviously emergency C-sections are not quite as safe as a scheduled C-section. So that's what I ended up deciding to do. And the entire 9 months of my pregnancy, I knew that I was most likely going to end up with a C-section. So I had a very long time to process it, to research it, to watch other women's story times on YouTube and have a good idea of how things were going to go down. And I really felt very confident going into it that I was going to be okay, that I wasn't super nervous about it until the morning of my C-section, where I had a complete freak out panic attack, but I'll get to that. So the weeks leading up to my C-section were spent in the pool. I did have an end of June birth, so it was very hot outside, and the pool was giving me a lot of comfort. It was taking a lot of pressure off of my hips and my back, and so I spent every day pretty much the whole day in the pool those last few weeks of pregnancy. And I was vlogging at the time, so I do have a lot of videos up on this channel. If you want to go back a little bit and watch them, you can see the days and weeks leading up to the birth. I haven't been more tired than normal, but I have been having to lay down more often because of the weight of my stomach. I was loving being pregnant. My entire pregnancy, I was thriving. I love being pregnant. I cannot wait to be pregnant again. But the last couple of weeks were starting to get really painful. Here is the bump at 38 weeks. He is all right in the front, a little basketball. He's not really on the sides at all. This is completely flat over here. It's kind of funny. He's just a very front little basketball baby. The last couple weeks of a pregnancy, your belly and your baby is so big and so heavy that you just have a ton of pressure on your hips and your pelvis. And James had dropped so low that I felt like he was gonna fall out. And I know that babies don't just fall out, especially if they're the first baby, but that's what it felt like. He was right there between my legs. And when I would try to walk up the stairs, I just felt like I was waddling with my legs really far apart. It was just a really, really strange feeling, like having a basketball or a watermelon sitting in your pelvis for months and months and months. And then towards the end, you're just like, I'm done with this. So again, just being in the pool really helped take pressure off of it and made me feel better. The last week before my scheduled C-section, I was going in for every other day doctor's appointments for her to check my cervix and just make sure that I wasn't dilating and going into early labor, because we really didn't want it to turn into an emergency C-section. So we actually scheduled my C-section for a week before my due date to lower the chances of me spontaneously going into labor and it turning into a more complicated procedure. So she was checking my cervix. I was not dilated, but I was almost completely effaced, which just means that the baby had dropped down and really like thinned that lining out, and he was very low. My doctor kept saying he's really low, like he's right there. I remember the very last cervix check that I had, which was like 2 days before my C-section was scheduled. My mom and I went and we had lunch afterwards on our way home, and it was just the two of us. And after we ate, I stood up from the booth in the restaurant and I had what was, I think, my only like true contraction. I think it was obviously a Braxton Hicks contraction because I wasn't actually in labor, but that was the only one that I felt that was that strong. I think it was the type of false contraction that sends women to the hospital because they're convinced that it's real labor because it's so painful. My entire stomach, like wrapping around to my back, tightens and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stand up straight. It was so strange. My mom said she literally thought I was going into labor. She thought my water was like gonna break right then. That didn't end up happening, obviously, but it was just a really intense feeling. The day before my C-section, I had to stop eating at a certain point that night and stop drinking water because my stomach had to be empty going into an early morning surgery. So I remember deciding that I wanted to have dinner early and go to bed early so that I could just kind of sleep through that time of not being able to eat, because at that point, I wasn't really able to keep much down. My acid reflux was really bad and I was starting to throw up my food again like I had at the beginning of my pregnancy. And I think it was just that I had no room in my stomach to eat. So I was eating these little tiny snacks constantly throughout the day instead of having any meals. So I knew that the idea of like cutting off food and not eating at all was going to be hard, just because I wasn't able to have like a solid meal right before the cutoff to like hold me through. I knew I was going to be hungry, so I was just like, I'm just going to try to go to bed early. I spent that day before my C-section organizing the nursery and making sure that our bags were properly packed and just kind of nesting, making sure everything was perfect in the room for when we got back. I took a really long shower, shaved everywhere, washed my hair, did all of that kind of stuff, and was ready to go. And that night I got insomnia and I just was so nervous and excited also because I knew I was going to be holding my baby soon. I could not sleep. And I remember I was vlogging, so you guys have probably seen this, but I like ended a vlog and I was like, it's like 2 a.m. and I have to get up in 2 hours for this and I haven't gone to sleep yet. And then 2 hours later I pick up for the next vlog and it's like the day of the birth, which I do have a birth vlog where I have actual footage that I took that day. So I'll link that video below if you want to check it out. I ended up having to get up around 4 o'clock in the morning, I think. We had to leave around 5 to go to the hospital and my C-section was scheduled around 7, I think. I might be getting those numbers wrong, but I remember it was the first appointment, like the first surgery slot that they had in that morning. And like I said, I got like 2 hours of sleep. That morning I woke up and I had fear come over me like I've never felt before. I don't think it was an actual panic attack, but I was definitely freaking out. I was so nervous that I threw up even though I had nothing in my stomach. It was like, my body like wasn't behaving. Like I was just, all of a sudden, I was scared I was gonna die and leave this baby momless. I don't know why it hit that morning. I just had been so mentally prepared for the C-section. I really did not think I was gonna react that way. And I woke up that morning and I was so scared. I don't think I've ever felt so scared that I was going to die and my baby wasn't gonna have a mom. Like that's what I kept thinking about. And I was so scared something was going to happen. And my dad drove Alex and I to the hospital that morning. My dad is an OBGYN and has done thousands of C-sections. So on the way there, I was like, Dad, I think I'm going to die. And he was just like, you're not going to die. Like, you're fine. He was like really calm and that did help. But I was just a nervous wreck. We got to the hospital right as the sun was starting to come up. My mom and Blair decided they were gonna come later to the hospital, like around the time of my actual surgery, because we had to be there early for all of the prep work and they wanted to sleep in a little bit, which I don't blame them. So it was just Dad, Alex, and myself. We got there, we checked in, and they took me to a room, like a pre-op room. That is where I changed into my gown, and I did some paperwork that just said, it was basically like a birth plan type thing. They asked me what my plans for breastfeeding were, if I had formula for the baby, which I didn't because I was gonna breastfeed. If I had any requests for like during surgery. I wanted to have skin to skin immediately after the baby was pulled out. And I also wanted to be able to start nursing right away, like while I was still being closed up. And those were things that I had researched online that would make it a little bit more natural-ish, like more of the bonding effects you can get from a vaginal birth and less like sterile, the baby comes out and goes away and you don't even see it right away. You know, like I wanted it to be, I wanted to see my baby right away and I wanted to have that skin to skin time. And so I explained all of that. We did the paperwork. They put me in the hospital bed. I was in my gown already and they did my IV. That was probably the worst part of, actually, no, there was one other time that was worse. This was the second worst part. I just hate getting IVs put in. Like, I hate it. After my IV got put in, I actually felt a lot calmer. I don't know why, because they actually told me they were not going to give me anything for anxiety or like calming purposes until after the baby was born. That was just their policy. So it wasn't that they had given me anything. I just think that I finally felt like it was happening and I had just kind of like settled into the idea. I just had calmed down a little bit. I think because I was there and I was like in the gown, in the bed, like ready to go, you know, I just felt a little bit better. They gave me a bag of water, like hydration through my IV. They said that that was standard. They did that before the C-section because, you know, you've been refraining from drinking water so you don't have any in your stomach, but your body still has to be hydrated. So they did an IV bag of water and then it was go time. So they wheeled me in my bed down to the OR room, and at the OR doors, that was when I had to be separated from Alex because Alex had to go and put like his scrubs on and all of that while I was being prepped. And this part took a really long time. It probably actually wasn't that long in reality, but it felt like this part dragged on for so long. The part where I went into the OR and separated from Alex, from that point to the point where they allowed him to come in, which was right before they cut to get the baby out, I felt like that was the longest and hardest part. Because first of all, I didn't like being separated from Alex. He was my comfort and I didn't like not having him there to tell me what was happening, to watch what was happening and tell me and calm me. There were a lot of people in the OR. I feel like there were at least 4 nurses, maybe more, maybe 6 nurses, and then the doctor, and then the anesthesiologist, and then me. They had the anesthesiologist talk over with me exactly what was gonna happen. I was gonna get a spinal, and he had me sit up in the bed and lean over my stomach as far as I could and like curl my back so that he could put it in my spine. I was really nervous for this part. I think this is what I was most nervous about, was the actual spinal being put in. The needle is really big. I don't know if you've ever seen a spinal needle, but it was really, really scary. That was what I was most nervous for. And I remember as I was leaning over my stomach, they had me hold that position for a really long time before they actually did the spinal, and it was so uncomfortable. I don't know why they had me hold it for so long, but because, you know, your baby is so big and taking up so much room inside of you, and you already really can't breathe even when you're sitting upright, when you're leaning over, crunched over like that, it's really uncomfortable. It pushes your baby more into your pelvis and just squishes everything, and there's no room to squish. So I was having a little bit of trouble breathing, and I kept wanting to tell them to hurry up, but like I wasn't going to be rude, so I didn't say that. But it just was like kind of strange that that part took so long. I don't know if maybe it was just in my head and it actually in reality was like 10 seconds and it felt like 10 minutes. He finally put in the spinal. I think he did a numbing shot first, if I'm remembering correctly, and then did the spinal. But either way, that was not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. I'm thinking probably because of the numbing shot, I actually did not feel it. It didn't hurt that badly. It just felt like a little shot or like a bee sting. It really just was not as bad as I had worked it up to be. The worst part of the entire process, the entire C-section process from start to finish, happened after the spinal was in. And that was, they leaned me back down, laid me back down after they had put the spinal in. And the anesthesiologist was at my shoulders and he was just kind of like, okay, it's gonna start working now. And I don't know if it was signals going to my brain that something in my body was happening that wasn't normal, wasn't good, but my body went into fight or flight mode and I started freaking out. It was the most uncomfortable physical and mental part of the whole process, and I don't even know how to explain it. I think my body thought that I was dying because I had this like sense of doom come over me. It was really, really weird. I've never felt that before. As my body was numbing, my brain was firing off like you're dying signals. It was awful. I remember staring up at the ceiling tiles of this OR and thinking to myself, I am never having another baby. Like, this is it. This is the worst feeling I've ever had. I am never going to feel this way again. This is the worst thing I can imagine. And it lasted for like 5 seconds and then it was gone. And of course I'm going to do it again. I would give anything to be pregnant again right now. You guys know we're trying to conceive again. It's been this whole thing. I would be so blessed to be able to do that again. But in the moment, I just remember thinking like, this is it. This is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. That feeling went away, thankfully, fairly quickly once my body had numbed and the spinal had worked its way through me, which didn't take very long. I would say probably under a minute. That feeling went away and then I was okay. At that point, I could not feel anything. They did have my little like shield up, you know, the like curtain. So I couldn't see what they were doing. I couldn't feel what they were doing. At this point, somewhere around here, they put my catheter in. Didn't even know they were doing it. They didn't say, we're putting your catheter in now. So I didn't even feel them do it. I don't know at what point they did it. I just know that afterwards, I just randomly had a catheter in. So that was good because I was worried about that. I was really nervous about the catheter part, and I'm glad that it happened when I couldn't feel it and I didn't even know it was happening, because that part was making me nervous too. This whole time, mind you, I'm asking my doctor for a Diet Coke. I don't know why, but all of a sudden I got so thirsty and I started craving Diet Coke in a way that I never have in my life. My body could only think about Diet Coke, like a nice iced Diet Coke. I hadn't eaten, I hadn't drank anything. I was super nervous. I had just done the spinal thing that was like really uncomfortable. All of a sudden my body was like, you know, it would be nice right now, a nice Diet Coke. So I kept talking about Diet Coke because I think I was just so nervous. I wanted Alex to come in. I kept saying, can Alex come in now? I don't know why, like, him coming in was taking so long too. But I also think that this probably happened in like the span of 5 minutes, like all of this. But it felt like it was like so long in the moment. She kept telling me, when this baby's out, I will get you a Diet Coke. She was like so cheerful and in such a good mood. So then finally they let Alex in. And once he comes in, it all happened really fast. I think they waited until right before they were literally about to cut to let him in. They had him come in, he sat in a chair right by my head, and they got started right away. The doctor said she was cutting, didn't feel anything. Then she said, you're gonna feel some pressure. And at that point, I felt like she was putting her entire body weight on my stomach. It didn't hurt. It just felt like a person was sitting on my stomach. I think that was the point where she was actually like pushing the baby out of the cut or like pulling or something. I heard her say he has blonde hair, and she said happy birthday to him, and everyone was really excited and happy. And when she pulled him out, the first thing that I said was, I can breathe again. All of a sudden had full lung capacity after having shortness of breath and like trouble breathing for months. And because it doesn't happen overnight, it happens really gradually. As your baby grows bigger and bigger, you start having less room for your lungs. It wasn't as noticeable as when he came out all at once, and it was like all of a sudden all this pressure was off of my stomach and like my lungs like inflated. It was the strangest feeling.
Love you, baby.
Here we go. Oh, he got a big head. Push.
Yeah.
He got a big head.
What's that is?
Oh, and we got a new loop times one.
Okay.
And it's got blondish hair.
Oh,
Happy
baby.
birthday! Watch out. Here we go. Johnny was cute. You're showing to his mama.
Mama.
perfect. And
You
start
did
pulling
so
hair.
good.
He's not even crying right now.
Were you inside of me for 9 months? Oh, honey.
He says,
I
I don't
love
know.
it.
I don't know.
It's comforting too. You're having
James gave a little cry, and that's when I knew he was okay. And then he stopped crying. He was totally fine. He just wasn't really a crier. He got wrapped up in a blanket. They brought him to me right away, put him on my chest, and I just melted. And I don't even remember much of what happened after that. As far as the C-section goes, I was just in this like bubble, this cocoon with my new baby, and Alex was right there. And oh my gosh, I just fell so in love with him. I already was in love with my baby because I shared a body with him for 9 months. I was super attached to him, but just seeing his little face and oh my gosh, little babies are just the best. So he got brought over, he was put on my chest, and I did have a lactation nurse in the room with me, so we started trying to get him to latch right away. I do have a breastfeeding story video that I will link below. So I'm not going to go into it in detail in this video because that is a whole video, but long story short, he did not latch. He was not able to latch. That was a whole thing. So we worked on trying to get him to latch the entire time that I was being sewn up. I don't really remember any of that. I was just so focused on James and Alex and that moment that I didn't care how long it took. I don't know how long it took, but she finished sewing me up and then we were ready to go. We got wheeled out in the bed, and as we were going back to my room, we passed the waiting room that had Blair and Mom, so they came out and they were able to see James right there in the hallway, and they came with us to the room, and I was holding James, and they kind of got me set up in this new room. It was different from the first room that I had been in. This was a bigger room. It had like a sofa and a couple of chairs, and it had, of course, its own bathroom. The first room did too, but this was like a bigger bathroom. They gave me another bag of fluids because they said that my pee wasn't the color that it should be, that I was showing signs of dehydration, and so they gave me another bag of fluids, and I still had my catheter in, so I guess I was just peeing without even realizing it, and they were monitoring all of that, and I was just holding James. They told me that I could have my Diet Coke, and I didn't want it anymore, so that was weird. Like, I ended up not wanting to eat or drink for several hours after I was allowed to, and it might have just been, you know, the spinal or some of the drugs they were giving me might have just like taken my appetite away, or I might have just been really distracted. All I wanted to do was hold James and stare at him. I didn't want anyone else to hold him. I just wanted to sit there and hold him and look at him. And that's what I did for hours after the C-section. I did let my family hold him a little bit, and Alex got to hold him too. But I pretty much wanted nothing more than to just sit there and look at him for the rest of my life. They gave me permission to eat, and I decided that I wanted broccoli cheese soup and a bread bowl. Like, that's what I wanted more than anything. 6 hours after my surgery, the nurse came in and took the catheter out and said, you know, do you want to try getting up and going to the bathroom now and kind of like walking? They kept telling me that with a C-section, the sooner that you're up and walking, the faster you heal. And so I definitely wanted to take advantage of that. So as soon as they told me that I could get up and try to walk, I did. They kind of helped me out of the bed, and then I was able to walk to the restroom by myself, which they were really impressed with. I didn't feel like it was a super impressive feat. Maybe they were just trying to make me feel better, but they said that a lot of women can't get up after 6 hours, so they were making me feel good. So we went to the bathroom. There were 2 nurses there, and they helped kind of clean me up and put on my post-birth underwear, which are those mesh underwears with the big pads. So even if you have a C-section, you still get the same underwear. Even though I had a C-section and not a vaginal birth, you still have a lot of bleeding after your birth, and so you still get the same mesh underwear that you would get, and the big pads. They showed me how they like double lined the pads, and they were just so nice and like just made me feel really like it was normal. Like, they didn't make me feel weird about anything. They just helped me clean up. I wasn't able to really like bend over as easily as normal because I did have a big cut in my stomach, but I couldn't feel anything. I was totally comfortable. They were giving me pain medication on rotation, so everything was fine as far as like feeling physically. I just didn't want to be separated from my baby like at all, not even for like 1 second to go to the bathroom. The lactation nurse came in and tried to work with me a little bit more with James because he hadn't latched yet, and we were still unable to get him to latch. We finally did get him to latch with a breast shield, and he nursed some, but looking back on it, we probably should have started pumping right away in the hospital, and we did not do that, and that is one of my biggest regrets from like my breastfeeding journey or whatever, and something I'm going to do differently if I am lucky enough to get pregnant again. But I worked with a lactation nurse for a while, and then by that point it was kind of nearing evening time, and the nurses came in and said that they could give me something to help me sleep a little bit, and I did not sleep at all. Not at all. Did not go to sleep that night. I spent the entire night holding James and loving on him, and I just couldn't sleep. I think I was just so excited. I remember the nurse was getting a little bit nervous that I wasn't sleeping because she did know I had told her that I had only gotten 2 hours of sleep the night before. And obviously with a big surgery like that, your body needs sleep. It needs food and sleep. It needs to be able to heal itself. And I just wasn't falling asleep. Like I wasn't doing it on purpose. I just couldn't sleep. And so they actually ended up discharging me the next morning to go home because normally I think with a C-section you would stay longer, but because I clearly wasn't resting and like wasn't letting other people hold my baby, there was really no point in me being there. Everything was fine in terms of the C-section incision, and I had been able to pee on my own. I guess that's one of the things that they look for to make sure that your body is doing what it should be doing after a surgery like that. So they did end up letting me go home. I was so ready to go home and get in my own bed with my baby and just snuggle him for weeks. Like in my mind, I wasn't gonna do anything but snuggle this baby for weeks. And I just was so ready to go home and like take a shower and just be like in my own environment and be able to eat food again without throwing it up. That was another thing, is I was immediately able to like eat food again without throwing it up. It was so wonderful. It's so crazy that I'm like, I just want to get pregnant again, when actually being pregnant like kind of sucks, but I loved it. They put me in a wheelchair to wheel me out to the car. I guess that's standard. They do that for everyone. And I was holding baby James, and we put him in his car seat, and I can hear him downstairs talking to his daddy, asking for something. Drove home, and we took him up to the bedroom, and we introduced him to our cats, which that was really sweet because it was like, you know, introducing all of our kids to each other. And then the next couple of days are a complete blur. I actually don't know where one day began and ended and the next day began and ended. Like it just completely blurs together. James had a lot of gas the first couple of days and screamed a lot, like where he was just red. Like we called it his purple cry because his whole body would get purple. He would cry so hard and so loud. And that did not end up getting better until his pediatrician recommended Gerber Soothe, which are these probiotic drops that you can put in breast milk or formula. That saved him. Like once we started introducing that, those pains went away and he stopped crying like that. But the first couple of days, that was probably the hardest part, is just not knowing how to make him feel better and just feeling like I was failing as a new mom because he wasn't breastfeeding. He wasn't latching well with breastfeeding. It was very on and off whether he would or wouldn't. Sometimes he would go hours and hours without properly latching, and it just was a nightmare. My milk hadn't come in. I was still hoping that I had colostrum, and everyone was telling me that my milk would come in and that this was normal and that it was fine, and I don't think it was fine. I don't think it was normal. Like I said, I have that whole video you can check out if you want to know the whole story with that. But yeah, those first couple days were really hard just because he was so uncomfortable. Like I said, until we got those Gerber Soothe drops. But I also just remember being so happy to just stare at him like all day long. As far as my recovery went from the C-section, it was really easy. I basically had to take it easy for a couple of weeks because I did have an incision, But other than that, I remember it being pretty easy. Like it really, I didn't have any issues with it. I don't remember having any issues with the recovery. And if you have a C-section scheduled, I don't want you to be scared. It's fine. There's scary things with a vaginal birth too. You could rip, you could, lots of things could happen with either type of birth. So I think just going in, knowing that you're doing whatever is the best for your particular situation, it really wasn't bad. And if you have a C-section scheduled, don't be afraid for it. It really is not that bad of a process, and you really won't remember much of it afterwards anyway, because you're just going to be so concentrated on your baby. So that was my C-section story. That is all that I can remember. I will have my birth vlog and my breastfeeding video and my broke my back video linked below, because those are the 3 videos I mentioned in this video. If you guys have any further questions that I didn't answer in this video, you can ask it in my next Q&A. When I did the poll on Instagram for this video, the second most popular vote was for a Q&A. So I am going to be doing a call for questions on Instagram, and you are welcome to leave any C-section or birth type questions in that. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much, BetterHelp, for sponsoring another video, and I will see you guys with my next one. Goodbye.